Shadow of the Colossus is complex in its simplicity. To me, it's more than a game. It's like an experience or feeling. It's been praised all over the internet for years and years, and nothing I can say in this video can ever fully encapsulate the legacy of this masterpiece. It has stood the test of time year after year and manages to be one of the most gorgeous and impactful video games of all time. Everything from the bleak and eerie loneliness of the landscape to the phenomenal soundtrack to the genius design and storytelling, this game has one of the most prolific playable experiences a person can have, in my opinion. Believe me, I'm not treading on any new water here, obviously, and if you clicked on this video, I'm guessing you're already a fan of Wander, Aggro, and the 16 giant lovable stone golems that roam the Forbidden Lands. But all of the Colossi aren't really created equal. Some of the fights are powerful scenes of emotional weight, and some of them kinda make me want to pull my hair out. But trust me,
when you fire this game up, your little fucking nuts are gonna start quaking, buddy.
So without further ado, let's get into Jallomoth's definitive ranking of the Colossi. Now before I get started, I want to preface how I decided the ranking order. I'm not the type of person to just randomly assign these guys some numbers. I really wanted to come up with an actual way of quantifying how much I like them. The way I achieved that was by scoring them 1 to 10 in 5 separate categories and then totaling the results together to come up with a number out of 50. Then I ordered those numbers least to most. The 5 variables I judged the Colossi on were their design, or how good I think they look in general, their variation, or what sets them apart from each other, their AI, and how frustrating or satisfying it can be to play, their location, or where the fight takes place in the Forbidden Lands, and lastly the fun, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through every category for every Colossi because that would make for an extremely boring video with numbers all over the place, but if you're interested, there will be a link in the description of this video to a Google Doc with the complete score sheet of results. And just remember, I love all these dudes and wouldn't have the game any other way. Okay, maybe I would like to see the beta Colossi get added, but that's a topic for another day. Now that all that boring shit is out of the way, let's get into it. So the bottom spot goes to Phaedra with a score of 25 out of 50. Phaedra is a skeletal, 4-legged giant, and it's the 4th Colossi Wander comes across in-game. Phaedra sticks out in the location department to me, as I think that the pasture the fight takes place in is rather pretty, but no other category score for Phaedra did it any good, unfortunately. At this point in the game, you've already seen a quadrupedal Colossi, and the 2 previous Colossi were much bigger than Phaedra, making the fight a little underwhelming in my opinion. I mean, come on, put between Gaius and Avion, this fight is just remembered as being boring and painfully slow-paced. The area that really kills Phaedra's scoring was the AI though. Actually, Phaedra's AI is the sole reason I put AI as one of the variables in this video in the first place. The way you defeat Phaedra is by angering it, then running into an underground tomb that's in the center of the playing field. Phaedra will try to peer into the stairwell you ran into, leading you to sneak up onto it via its whiskers or ass bone. Then you can finally get to those sweet glowing weak spots. Now on paper, all of that sounds perfectly fine, but in practice, it can be excruciatingly frustrating to get Phaedra to do what you want. I myself got stuck on Phaedra my first time playing, because while I did assume getting it to peer into the stairwell was the correct way to beat it, I couldn't get it to happen, so I assumed you defeated it a different way. So after trying a bunch of other random garbage for a while, I finally caved in and googled what to do, and I was a little upset to find out it was the exact thing I assumed I was supposed to do 30 minutes prior. Believe me, I love this game and will sing its praise for years and years to come. And honestly, I even feel blasphemous shitting on it at all. But the process of defeating Phaedra is just a little too slow and clunky and can be a pain in the ass to do in time attack mode, as getting this boss to do what it's supposed to do on time can be a total game of luck. Believe me, I love this big dumb bone horse, but somebody had to be last. Coming in at spot number 15 with 26 out of 50 points possible, just edging out Phaedra by 1 point, is Quadratus. Good old Quadratus. I have nothing against Quadratus or his fight, but it's extremely simple, and I couldn't really justify putting it any higher. And yeah, I know it's simple for a reason. He's the second fight in the game. You're still learning the ropes, so it couldn't be too difficult or too stylistically different from Malice. I totally understand his place and his role in the game. But when you put him up next to some of the more grand fights in the game, Quadratus just doesn't really hold up as well in my opinion. While he is an extremely large Colossi, I don't really get that same sense of awe when seeing him for the first time. Speaking of that, where does Quadratus even come from when you see him for the first time? He bursts out of this wall once you get to him, but how did he know you were there? Did he even know you were there, or did he just decide to burst through this wall because he wanted to? Why was he trapped inside this big wall? Shadow of the Colossus has some mysteries I guess we'll never truly get the answers to. Quadratus had a score of 26 out of 50, but jumping all the way up to 35 out of 50 in 14th place is Basaran. Well, maybe I shouldn't say jumping. Crawling into 14th place? Falling over into it is more likely. While I have a sweet spot for Quadratus, I have somewhat of a sour spot for Basaran. While his fight is interesting, he's this low on the list for the same reason as Phaedra, his AI. But before we get into what this fight does wrong, let's talk about what Basaran does right. This guy is massive. You basically need aggro to fight him, which keeps you on your toes. He has an elemental attack, which is very interesting to see, and his fight takes place in an area you would have never visited if he wasn't there, the giant dead field of geysers and smoke. Basaran could have ended up being much higher on this list if it wasn't for the poor execution of his fight. You need to get him to stumble over by walking over a geyser, which in and of itself can be a challenge because for some reason the hitboxes don't work the way you think they should. Then you shoot the bottoms of his feet, causing him to roll over, allowing you to climb up onto him. Then once you're onto him, you stab him and he dies like usual. This fight was ambitious and interesting, but in my opinion, the first half of the fight just feels too clunky and clumsy, and the second half is too boring. I haven't talked about the controls of this game yet, and I personally really enjoy the handling of most things, but a lot of people get frustrated with the way Wander and Aggro are controlled, and while playing this fight, it's easy to see what upsets people about them. Basaran's fight is still worth it just for the great atmosphere and the interesting concept alone, but I just wish Team Eco would have changed things up to make it feel a little neater. So you might be a little surprised to see the final boss of the game so low on the list, even though you're kind of the final boss technically. But before you click off this video, let me justify this placement by referencing the score sheet. In 4 of the 5 categories, Malice got a fat 8 out of 10. So what variable dragged him down so low? Unfortunately, it was just 3 out of 10 in fun, giving him a total of 35.
In the beginning
of the fight, the atmosphere is setting this battle up to be big. You know this is the end. The skies are getting darker and cloudier, you see Malice in the distance, and it truly is masterful storytelling. The closer you get to Malice as you're making the trek up to him, it gets more and more treacherous. The rain gets harder, you're dodging and weaving through elemental attacks and in stone caverns. The first time you play Malice, you know it's going to be good. And in my personal opinion, and the opinion of my friends too, after the fight, I just feel underwhelmed. It takes a really long time to get up to his head, and it can be extremely frustrating to get knocked all the way back down and climb back up again. It was to a point where I no longer wanted to defeat him to progress the game, I just wanted to beat him to get it over with. I'm no stranger to hard games. I love Cuphead, and my friends who struggle with Malice are big fans of the Souls games. I think the difference is a game can be tough but fair, and in my opinion, the Malice fight can be dragged out for too long and can be way too unforgiving. I don't hate it or anything, Malice for sure is an imposing enemy, and the set pieces for the battle are fantastic looking. The overall design of the fight is great, but I think it could have just been done a little differently. Barba is interesting to me when it comes to his scoring. I surprised even myself with him being this low in the ranking, as I really enjoyed myself during a majority of the fight. Even if I was a little slow to figure out how to beat him, I just chalked that up to me being generally bad at video games. What really was a detriment to this big sexy bearded beast though was its variation. You see, Barba is one of the 4 big giant fuzzy men in this game along with Valus, Gaius, and Argus. Barba is the 6th Colossi you come across in the Forbidden Lands, meaning once you fight him you've already fought Valus and Gaius, the latter of which was much bigger than Barba, so when I saw Barba I didn't marvel at the absolute size of this lad or geek about his design because he basically just looks like Valus's pissed off big brother. I just kind of went, oh, he has a big weird tumor beard. Then I sat there kind of disgusted for a minute looking at his big fleshy hair covered protuberance dangling from his chin, then I beat him and moved on. I definitely had fun, but I can't really justify putting him any higher than anybody else that comes after this point. Sorry, but this game sets itself a high standard. With Argus, I'm not upset, just disappointed. Starting off with before the fight itself, Argus is kind of difficult to find in the first place, but once you get to him, you see these giant stone columns and plinths and bridges way above you, and you know you're in the right place. His battle takes place in one of the coolest areas in the entire map, to be honest. You know this guy is the second to last boss, and you're excited to see what he has in store. He smashes his hand right in front of you and climbs up. The suspense is killing you. and then it just turns out he's a big stupid monkey. Nothing is wrong with Argus's design inherently, but you've already fought Valus, Barba, and Gaius. This late in the game, did we really just need another big fuzzy dude with a weapon? And the most shocking thing to me is that Barba and Gaius are both bigger than Argus. And to be honest, how many of you knew that you needed to stand on this exact spot to make Argus hit this specific stone platform to move up 1.5 feet so you could progress in the fight? I had to look it up to figure out what to do because Argus is faster than Wander running, so I kept running around in circles not knowing what to do. The bridge mechanic is very fun to see in action, and jumping onto his head at the end of the fight is great. But did we really need to see Argus this late in the game? Probably not. The pacing of this game might have benefited from putting a different Colossi in Argus's spot. Just fruit for thought. As we get to number 10 on this list, I'm going to have less and less bad things to say about the Colossi, and this video is basically just going to devolve into me gushing about how good they all are. And Durge is a great place to start all that gushing. Durge's fight in the game is fantastic, and it's what a boss fight in this game should be like. It's a challenge at first, but then once you get the hang of it, it's thrilling as hell and keeps you on your toes. My first thought once walking into the giant circular chasm that is Durge's area, I assumed that the Colossi would fall from the hole in the top. But the cutscene starts and you see the earth below you starting to shake, and you know some fuck shit is about to go down. I really like the idea of this big beast chasing you down, and you're barely fast enough on your horse to keep the distance between you and imminent death. If I had one complaint, it's that shooting it in the eyes isn't super obvious, but the in-game hints help with that. Durge definitely isn't perfect, but god do I have fun playing him. Alright, I've heard some weak-ass losers complain about this part of the game, but number 9 is Senobia. If you ever hear any such slander, stop being friends with that person immediately, because this fight is amazing. Senobia's AI can be a little stupid, but what he's lacking in computer smarts, he gains in literally everything else. People say this fight feels way too scripted, but in my opinion, it's just so cinematic. The set pieces in Senobia's big area are some of the most impressive in the entire game, and having a destructive environment and using the landscape to your advantage is always a win in my book. He does get a few points knocked off for variation because he is the second small boy in the game, and while I admit you needing to stand on this exact pillar to get him to run into it at the end isn't exactly spelled out for you, this Chad has way too much going for him for me to be upset about that stuff. The sound design is phenomenal, and I think it's really funny that whenever this guy actually gets you, he knocks Wander's ass right into REM sleep.
No, don't pull, no! Ah! Damn!
So coming in at number 8, perfectly in the middle of the ranking, is the first Colossi Wander ever comes across in game, Valus. With a respectable 40 out of 50 score, Valus is not the biggest Colossi, he isn't the hardest, and nothing about his fight is different in any way from any other Colossi. But the real standout score Valus received is a perfect 10 out of 10 in variation, as, for a new player, you have nothing to compare Valus to. Maybe the box art helped you get somewhat of an understanding, but even that does not compare to the actual sight of seeing Valus for the first time in game, roaming through the valley. That first time you see him is extremely special and can be one of the most powerful moments in the entire game for some people. Having to aim the camera up, barely being able to fit him into the frame of the screen. You look all the way up and you feel like an insect. Birds are circling around his head. You're barely noticeable to these creatures. That feeling is what puts Valus this high on the list. And even though Gaius has sort of become the most memorable and recognizable of the Colossi, I will always be a Valus purist. Similar to Valus, Pelagia has a perfect 10 out of 10 in variation, but I was tempted to give this dude a damn 11. Pelagia is just so interesting to me. He's easily the most alien of all the Colossi in the game. All the other Colossi in this game have these signature blue eyes that turn red when they've been pissed off, but Pelagia is blind. He uses elemental ball lightning projectile attacks, and you need to smack teeth on the top of his head to control his movements. Really let all that sink in. Also, you cannot tell me this is not one of the most satisfying sounds in the entire game. I really want to drive home the point that Pelagia is just straight up weird. He doesn't resemble a specific animal, he's blind, mute, and deaf. He has rocky scales, stone plating, bone, grass, and presumably skin underneath all that. He's biodiverse as hell. Also, shout out to Team Eco for his intro cutscene. Seeing him underwater and then displaying the big stone areas you need to lead him to is a nice touch, and subtly tells the player the steps to take to defeat him. Something I need to mention is that Pelagia for some reason looks extremely sad to me, and I would like to cheer him up. That will unfortunately not happen due to him being a 10-story tall freakazoid alien beast that I don't want to go anywhere near. Even though I said I was a Valis purist earlier, Gaius is and always will be the poster child for Shadow of the Colossus, and I'm gonna be honest, it's for good reason. This fight might be the perfect, quintessential Shadow of the Colossus battle. The reason there are even spots above Gaius' fight is honestly just personal preference. There isn't much of anything I can say about Gaius' moments in the game negatively, but I would like to say something. I don't know if everybody else had this moment, but the story this fight tells with 0 words is extremely impactful to me and gets even better on a 2nd, 3rd, or 58th playthrough. On the first playthrough, the reason Gaius is special is because his scale is incredible. Most players have this dear God moment as he stands up and towers over you in a way that's almost indescribable. And on repeat playthroughs, with the knowledge you gain after the ending of the game, this fight hurts even more. This giant peaceful creature wakes up from its rest, likely sees the beams of light in the sky, and knows 2 of his brethren have been slain. The knight pulls himself up onto his feet and does the best to protect his brothers from you, the enemy. Gaius winces in pain as you stab him, and all of a sudden you no longer care that you can't skip the cutscene of him falling over. You want to watch it, and you want to feel bad for this giant magnificent bastard. This fight truly shines a light on the genius and beautiful storytelling Team Ico was able to pull off with little to no dialogue at all. How did they go on to make this game? What the hell? I have a feeling I'm gonna lose some subscribers after this somewhat controversial placement, and this is only my first video, so I guess I'm gonna be putting the negatives after this one. For some reason, I always see people putting Celosia at the bottom of their lists, like usually the very, very bottom. But Celosia could easily be even higher on this ranking for me. Let me systematically break down point by point why the people who hate on this excellent boy are wrong. The first argument I hear all the time for Celosia being cringe is that he's way too small, so he doesn't even deserve the title of Colossi. And while I might have noticed this guy is a little small, in my opinion that makes him way scarier. I would literally rather fight Gaius in real life than Celosia. Celosia at first doesn't even have a weak spot. He's too small, fast, and agile to hide from, so you kind of start freaking out a little bit as he barrels towards you, and it gets even worse when he's mauling your ass and flinging you around like a chew toy. The second argument I've heard from the anti-Celosia gang is that his area is too tight and claustrophobic, but is that not part of the enjoyment of the level? The deep quarry and tomb you fight Celosia in is such a badass setting for a fight, and when you're out in the quarry there's nothing to climb and he's too fast to avoid, and in the tomb the hallways are extremely tight and it feels claustrophobic and scary. All I have to say about all that is, good! Feeling hopeless and like this thing is bullying you into submission is a positive thing and earns him the title of Colossi to me easily. The biggest argument I hear is the torch, and how introducing a new item like that is strange when it pops up this late in the game. But let me tell you something, this game is not a 70-hour adventure. Shadow of the Colossus is like a 5 or 6 hour game. Introducing a new item 4 hours in is not jarring, it's interesting. All the Colossi are different. Celosia is afraid of fire, and there's an awesome new mechanic where you force Celosia to back up in fear and he swats at you like a cat. This game does a great job in portraying Celosia as both an innocent little whimpering puppy and this giant fearsome beast. You feel equally somber and satisfied after tricking him. Then, once you manage to get onto him, it's like a high-octane bull ride and you better hope and pray you don't fall off. Celosia is unique, interesting, fun, intense, and I just don't get how so many people have such a negative reaction to him. Now at this point in the ranking, the list becomes damn near impossible to judge simply because the remaining Colossi are all perfect, but let me rant about this bird for a second, okay? Think about the fact that Avion is the 5th Colossi. He is early game. At this point, you've only fought the first 4 good, respectable boys, but this fight blew my expectation away. And it was at this point in my first playthrough of the game that I realized that Shadow of the Colossus would be a mainstay on any list of incredible games for me. You ride aggro into his battle area, which in and of itself is breathtaking. It's this giant, bleak, Dark Souls-esque castle sunken and half submerged in water, and then you see him, Avion, the flying Colossi. My first thought was that I would shoot him down with arrows, but then he swoops down towards you and you realize what you need to do. That leap to cling onto Avion's wing as he ascends into the sky is one of the most insane moments from the entire game, and I just think this fight was handled so well by the devs. I've heard some people criticizing his design, saying that he's just a big bird, But with him being the introduction to the flying colossi, the simplicity of him being a giant stone bird suits the game's style and feel perfectly, and earns Avion the number 4 spot on this list. Alright, hell yes. I'm gonna keep this one short and sweet, but in third place with 45 out of 50 is the famous tail in the pale, Kuamori. First of all, look at this face. That alone gets him this high. But he's not just a pretty lady, okay? He's more than good looks. He's not just a big dumb rock gecko of sorts that shoots lasers out of his mouth. Speaking of lasers, don't act like Kuamori didn't catch you off guard at first with that. He's the first Colossi in the game to use elemental attacks and even uses a poison gas attack that's unique to him. The pseudo-coliseum you fight Kuamori in is breathtaking yet tight. Seeing him clamber up the walls like a lizard is terrifying. His arm shooting mechanic is great, he has unique attack styles and movement mechanics, and is all around terrifically designed. Seeing him fall onto his back and struggle to get up, and then when you kill him his death animation is just him giving up and submitting. It's depressing as hell. Which is good. The sadder the Colossi death in this game, the better. That's kind of the whole point of the game in the first place. Dear God, where do I even start with this guy? Okay, let me give you a scenario. You're a super short and quiet 16-year-old boy trying to avenge/save your girlfriend. All you have to defend yourself is your sword and your bow. You come across a massive open body of water and are confused because you're pretty sure this is where the sword led you. But then it clicks. Instant fear of the ocean engaged.
Ah! I'm not afraid of you!
I would be scared of this part of the game even if Hydrus didn't even show up. Sure, this massive electric catfish sure is terrifying, but I'm already scared of murky waters, seaweed, the unknown, and everything that has to do with all of that. Then you introduce this guy to the equation and it's a whole new story. The only negative thing worth mentioning is I docked him a couple points for design because of the whole lightning underwater thing, but other than that, I would be hard-pressed to say anything misses here. Hanging onto this dude for dear life as he flails in the water is as thrilling as it is visually stunning. Now before we get to number 1, I'd like to give some honorable mentions to Colossi who unfortunately didn't make the list. Aaron Yeager, the Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man, the Gumball Guardians, Paul Bunyan, and finally, Evangelion Unit 1. Okay, let me pitch to you why Phalanx is easily the undisputed best Colossi in this entire game. Starting with scale, Phalanx is easily the largest of all 16 Colossi, coming in at an insane 475 feet long. He's bigger than Durge and Hydrus combined. He's so big that his fight doesn't take place in a valley or a small lake or a courtyard or something like that. It takes place in an entire desert. He's a strange flying serpent beetle who manages to perfectly walk that line of alien yet recognizable. He's also another one of the beasts with mechanics specific to him, this time being the air sacs you need to bow down. I know I've used a lot of words in this video along the lines of perfect and quintessential, but this fight is in a whole different ballpark. Phalanx is Shadow of the Colossus' magnum opus, and here's why. The larger themes and features of this game accentuate the beauty and serenity of these creatures, shining a light on the fact that all life is gorgeous. I would say no fight shows this side of the game better than this. Phalanx is the only Colossi in the entire game to never engage Wander or aggro in any way. He tries to hide by burrowing in the sand, but he does not attack you. This massive, beauteous creature passively flies through the air as the music swells. You're racing through the desert on your trusty steed, sword in hand, and you know what you need to do. Sometimes reasonable men must make unreasonable decisions. For our main character, slaying this docile creature is a necessary evil. Its beauty only makes it harder, and it accentuates the best parts of the plot of this story. And that is why Phalanx is the best Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus. So I hope you guys enjoyed my first video. I've wanted to make content on this platform for about as long as I can remember, and taking this first step has been a monumental achievement for me. My future videos will likely be about much different topics, different shows, movies, games, and so on, but if you'd like to continue to support my future content, that would be incredibly appreciated. Rock over London, rock on Chicago.